Morning light streamed through the carefully positioned windows of Sophie Bennett's kitchen, casting golden rectangles across the pristine quartz countertops. Sophie stood in the center of her domain coffee mug cradled in her hands, breathing in the scent of walnut cabinetry and possibility. At 37, she had finally created the space she'd spent 15 years dreaming about. A professional kitchen designer whose reputation had grown steadily over the years, Sophie understood that this room represented more than just beautiful materials and perfect proportions. It was tangible proof that she had escaped, succeeded, built something entirely her own. She ran her fingers along the custom walnut cabinets with their soft-closed drawers, feeling the smoothness of the finish she'd selected after weeks of deliberation. The Kokoda gold quartz countertops caught the light, their subtle pattern reminiscent of flowing water. The six-burner Wolf range stood like a centerpiece, professional grade and gleaming. And the island her pride and joy served as both preparation space and the heart of her home, topped with a single slab of stone that had cost more than her first car. The Italian tile backsplash imported specifically for this project created a mosaic of earthy tones that complemented the handcrafted iron cabinet pulls she'd commissioned from an artisan in Seattle. Each element had been meticulously chosen not just for its beauty, but for its significance. This kitchen wasn't simply where she cooked, it was her portfolio, her sanctuary, her triumph. 6 months ago, when Sophie had first walked through the modest ranch house in the quiet neighborhood on Portland's west side, she'd seen past the dated interiors and worn carpet. The bones were good, the natural light exceptional, and the kitchen, well, the kitchen had become her canvas. 3 months and nearly $40,000 later, she had transformed the outdated galley into this showpiece. She took another sip of coffee, savoring the quiet morning, the stillness that came with living alone. Her phone vibrated against the counter, disrupting her moment of peace. Sophie frowned at the screen, an unfamiliar tension creeping up her spine as her sister's name flashed on the display. Natalie rarely called, preferring to communicate through their mother or social media. Sophie hesitated before answering, already anticipating the familiar weight of family obligations settling on her shoulders. Rachel. Oh, thank God you answered. Natalie's voice pitched high with what sounded like genuine distress. In the background, construction noise blared, drilling, hammering men shouting instructions. What's wrong? Sophie asked, already regretting the concern in her voice. It's a disaster, Natalie sobbed. Our apartment, the landlord started renovations without telling us. They're literally tearing out walls. We have nowhere to go. The children's voices rose in the background, her niece's distinctive cry piercing through the chaos. Sophie closed her eyes, seeing exactly where this conversation was headed. Have you called Mom's house? It's too small, you know that. Richard's using the spare room as his office now. We tried a hotel, but with Eric's work being slow. Natalie trailed off, letting the financial implications hang in the air. Sophie visualized her pristine living room with toys scattered across the hardwood floors, sticky fingerprints on her walls. Then she heard what sounded like her niece crying again, and her resolve wavered. Sophie, just for a week, Natalie pleaded. The contractor promised they'd be done in a week. We'll be like ghosts. You won't even know we're there. Sophie gazed around her kitchen, her sanctuary suddenly feeling the fragility of the piece she'd built. 1 week, she said firmly. And there are rules. No toys in the living room, no food outside the kitchen, and absolutely no one touches anything in my kitchen. It's not just my personal space, it's my work showcase. Clients come here. Of course, Natalie gushed. Oh, Sophie, you're saving us. We'll be there tonight around 6 if that's okay. Just with overnight bags, nothing major. After hanging up, Sophie spent the rest of the afternoon client-proofing her house. Breakables went into high cabinets. Her design portfolios moved to her locked office. She even installed child safety locks on the kitchen cabinets containing her good china and crystal. 1 week, she told herself, smoothing a hand over her kitchen island. I can handle anything for 1 week. The memory of her childhood home flickered through her mind, unbidden and unwelcome. Sophie had been 8 when her biological father left 10, when her mother Patricia remarried Richard Morgan. Her stepfather had quickly established himself as the undisputed authority in their household, charming and gregarious, in public controlling and manipulative behind closed doors. Sophie had learned early to move quietly to make herself invisible when Richard's jaw tightened in that particular way that signaled an impending storm. Her mother, desperate for security after being abandoned with a young daughter, had chosen peace over protection, acquiescing to Richard's demands, rather than risking his displeasure. When Natalie came along 2 years after the wedding, the family dynamic shifted permanently. Where Sophie was difficult and too independent, Natalie could do no wrong. She inherited Patricia's delicate features and Richard's talent for manipulation, growing into a woman who expected success without effort. Sophie shook the memories away, focusing instead on preparing for her unwelcome guests. She stocked the refrigerator with child-friendly snacks, cleared space in her closets, and set up the guest room with fresh linens. Perhaps this time would be different. People changed, grew up. Surely Natalie, now a mother herself, had matured beyond the petty rivalries of their youth. At 6:15, Sophie heard car doors slamming in her driveway. She glanced out the window and felt her stomach drop. Not one vehicle, but 3 had arrived. Natalie's minivan was expected. The pickup truck loaded with what looked like construction equipment was not. Neither was the third vehicle, a beat-up sedan with 4 men climbing out, all wearing work boots and carrying tool bags. Sophie opened the front door before they could knock. "What is this?" Natalie bounded up the steps, all smiles now that she'd secured her landing spot. "Oh, Eric's crew. They need somewhere to store their tools since the apartment is locked down. Just for the week, like I said. They won't be staying." "Natalie," Sophie began, her voice tight. I know they're just dropping things off." She breezed past Sophie into the house, already appraising it like she owned it. "Wow, you've really done something with this place. Though that wall color is a bit cold, don't you think I'd have gone with something warmer?" Eric followed, giving Sophie an awkward nod before directing his crew. "Just stack everything neat in the garage," he called out. "There's no room in the garage," Sophie protested. "That's where I store client samples." "Living room corner, then," Natalie decided already, directing traffic. "Kids, take your bags to Aunt Sophie's guest room. Carefully, don't touch anything." Within minutes, Sophie's orderly home descended into chaos. Tool bags and equipment boxes piled up in her living room. Children's suitcases, far more than overnight bags, were dragged down her hallway. The men from Eric's crew trooped through her house, leaving dusty boot prints on her floors. "Eric," one of them called out, "where you want the tile saw, tile saw." Sophie whirled on her sister. "Why do you have a tile saw?" "Oh, that's for our bathroom renovation," Natalie said casually, testing the firmness of Sophie's couch cushions. "The one they're supposed to start after the landlord finishes. Don't worry, it's all staying packed." By 8 o'clock, Sophie's house looked like a construction staging area. The crew had left, but not before one of them used her powder room and left it reeking of cigarette smoke. The children were wound up from the chaos racing through the halls despite her repeated requests for calm. Eric had commandeered her television, switching from her carefully curated streaming services to a sports channel at maximum volume. "Kids need to eat," Natalie announced, heading for Sophie's kitchen. "I have some pasta," Sophie started. "Jason only eats chicken nuggets. Lily's in a mac and cheese phase. You don't mind if I just order pizza, do you? I'm exhausted from all this stress." By the time Sophie escaped to her bedroom that night, her house felt foreign. The guest room door was ajar, revealing suitcases exploded across the floor and toys already scattered on every surface. The living room television continued blaring, and from the kitchen she could hear Natalie rummaging through her cabinets, exclaiming over her fancy equipment. Day 2 brought new violations. Sophie woke to find Eric's crew had returned, using her driveway as a meeting point before heading to their job sites. They'd helped themselves to coffee from her machine, leaving grounds scattered across her previously immaculate counters. Natalie was still in her pajamas at noon, directing the children to play quietly, while she scrolled through her phone on Sophie's couch. "Don't you have anywhere to be?" Sophie asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "It's so hard to work with everything in chaos." Natalie sighed dramatically. "My online business really needs stability, you know. But don't worry about us. We're fine, just relaxing here." That evening brought a new development. Richard. He appeared at Sophie's door without warning, overnight bag in hand. "Heard there was a family gathering," he announced, pushing past her. Can't have my grandkids staying somewhere without checking it out. Richard had aged into his 60s with the same commanding presence that had dominated Sophie's childhood. His hair had silvered attractively, and his clothes spoke of comfortable prosperity, the image of the successful professional. Only Sophie noticed the calculating assessment in his eyes as he surveyed her home. Nice place, Sophie. Bit sterile, but nice. This isn't a hotel, she said through gritted teeth. Family helps family, he replied, already claiming her favorite armchair. That's what you career women never understand, too busy with your fancy jobs to remember what matters. Sophie retreated to her home office, the only space still untouched by the invasion. She sat at her desk, hands trembling slightly, as she tried to focus on client proposals. Through the door, she heard Richard's distinctive laugh, followed by Natalie's appreciative giggle, a sound that transported her instantly back to childhood dinners, where she'd sat silent while her sister and stepfather shared private jokes at her expense. Her phone buzzed with a text notification, a colleague asking about meeting a client tomorrow. Sophie began to type a response when another notification appeared, Richard sending a message to someone. The preview showed just a fragment, going according to plan. She doesn't Sophie frowned, a chill running through her. She must have misread. Why would Richard be texting about her? But when she checked again, the notification had disappeared. By day 3, Sophie's one-week house guests had fully colonized her space. Richard held court in the living room, offering unsolicited commentary on everything from her decor choices to her unnatural single status. Natalie had discovered Sophie's home office and set up what she called a temporary workspace, spreading her dubious business materials across Sophie's drafting table. The children, sweet as they were, individually had turned her hallways into racetracks, and her guest bathroom into what looked like a glitter bomb testing site. But the kitchen violations hurt most. Despite her explicit instructions, Sophie caught Eric microwaving leftover Chinese food on her good china. Natalie had reorganized her spice rack to be more intuitive, and someone she suspected Richard had used her professional knife set to open packages, leaving nicks in the blades. "It's just a kitchen." Natalie laughed when Sophie protested. "You're so uptight about it. Things are meant to be used, Sophie." Each night, Sophie retreated to her bedroom earlier, listening to the sounds of her house being lived in by people who didn't understand or respect what it meant to her. Eric's crew continued their morning gatherings, now bringing breakfast sandwiches that left grease stains on her porch. Richard's commentary grew more pointed, especially after his evening bourbons, and Natalie's temporary setup expanded daily with boxes of inventory appearing in Sophie's halls. By Thursday, Sophie was counting hours. 3 more days, 72 hours. She could survive anything for 72 hours. She focused on work, staying late at client sites, finding reasons to avoid her own home until bedtime. That evening, she returned from a consultation to find Natalie waiting in the kitchen, sketching something on a notepad. "So, small change of plans," Natalie began, not meeting Sophie's eyes. "The renovation at our place hit a snag. Something about permits. Might be closer to 2 weeks now." Sophie stared at her, words failing. Behind Natalie, she could see fabric samples push-pinned to her kitchen walls. Her kitchen walls. 2 weeks, she managed. Maybe 3 tops. "And actually, I wanted to talk to you about the kitchen." "The kitchen?" Sophie's voice came out dangerously quiet. Natalie brightened, mistaking her tone for interest. "Yes, I've been thinking this space has so much potential, but it's so clinical. All that white and steel. I'm seeing farmhouse chic. Warm woods, maybe some open shelving, definitely a different backsplash, something with personality." Sophie gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "This is a professional show kitchen. I use it for client presentations." "Exactly why it needs warmth." Natalie pulled out her phone, scrolling through Pinterest. "Look, I found the perfect inspiration. We could even document the transformation for my design portfolio. From Cold to Cozy, a kitchen transformation by Natalie Morgan Interiors." "No." She looked up, startled by the firmness in Sophie's voice. "Sophie, don't be so rigid. Change can be good. And honestly, with Eric's crew here already, we could get it done so cheaply. They owe him some favors." I said no. "This is my house, my kitchen, my decision." Natalie's face shifted, the sweet sister act dropping. "You know that's your problem. Everything is mine, mine, mine with you. Some of us don't have your advantages. Some of us could use a little help establishing ourselves." "I've helped you." How many clients did I refer to you? How many times did I cover when you didn't show up? That's not the same as real support. Real family would. Sophie held up her hand. We're not doing this. One more week, as you said. Then everyone needs to leave. Natalie shrugged, tucking her phone away. Sure, Sophie, whatever you say. That night, Sophie heard hushed conversations from the living room. Eric's crew had stayed late, allegedly planning tomorrow's job, but their voices carried. Words like uptight, selfish, and needs to learn drifted to her bedroom. Richard's bourbon-roughened laugh punctuated their discussion. Sophie lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Something didn't feel right. The fabric samples on the wall, the tile saw, the secretive planning sessions. A suspicion began forming in her mind, too outlandish to believe, but too persistent to ignore. Friday morning brought new violations. Someone had used her cast iron skillet and left it soaking in water rust already forming on the carefully seasoned surface. Her knife block had been moved and several blades were missing entirely. Worst, her collection of handmade ceramic bowls, gifts from a potter client, had been stacked carelessly, chipping the glazed edges. Accidents happen, Natalie said breezily when Sophie confronted her. You can't expect kids to navigate a museum. Maybe if you made the space more family-friendly. It's not supposed to be family-friendly. It's my home. Richard looked up from his permanent position in Sophie's armchair. Selfish attitude, Sophie. No wonder you're alone. Sophie left for work without another word, but focus was impossible. Every client kitchen she visited reminded her of her own invaded space. When a client complimented her design aesthetic and asked about her own kitchen, Sophie nearly broke down. She canceled her afternoon appointments and drove to a coffee shop, needing neutral territory to think. As she nursed a latte, Sophie scrolled through her phone, reviewing the strange events of the week. On impulse, she opened her Instagram and searched for Natalie's business account. What she found made her blood run cold. A post from 3 weeks ago showed a mood board titled, Sophie's Kitchen Renovation. The caption read, planning a special surprise for someone who needs more warmth in her life. Can't wait to reveal the transformation. From cold to cozy surprise, have family. Helping family. Sophie scrolled further. 2 months ago, Natalie had posted photos of various kitchen fixtures with the caption, sourcing for a big project, high-end pieces at bargain prices thanks to family connections. Hatch insider deals. Flip for profit. Her hands trembling now, Sophie opened her messages with Natalie. She scrolled back months looking for any hint, any clue. There, in March, Natalie had asked for photos of Sophie's kitchen, for inspiration. Sophie had sent them pleased that her sister seemed interested in her work. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a temporary stay. This was a planned takeover. They were going to renovate her kitchen without permission to destroy what she'd built and replace it with Natalie's vision. And somehow, Sophie was certain they planned to profit from it. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing. First thing Monday, she'd call a locksmith. Family or not, this had to end. She fell asleep planning the conversation, how she'd be firm but fair. Give them 24 hours to relocate. Monday morning's client meeting ran long. A couple building their dream home, excited about every detail, reminded Sophie why she loved her job. They spent hours selecting finishes, and for a brief time she forgot about the chaos waiting at home. It was barely noon when Sophie pulled into her driveway, energized from the successful meeting and ready to reclaim her space. More vehicles than usual crowded the street. Eric's entire crew, it seemed, plus a van she didn't recognize. The moment she opened her door, she heard it, the sharp crack of demolition, the whine of power tools. Her feet carried her to the kitchen before her mind could process what she was hearing. Richard stood in the center of Sophie's beautiful kitchen, sledgehammer in hand, bringing it down on her quartz countertop. The Kakata gold surface she'd spent months selecting was already spiderwebbed with cracks. Behind him, Eric's crew was dismantling her custom cabinets, wrenching doors off hinges, pulling drawers from their soft close slides. What are you doing? The words tore from Sophie's throat. Richard paused mid-swing, grinning. About time you showed up. Natalie said you'd be at work all day. Her sister stood by the refrigerator, directing 2 men measuring the wall. Oh, hi, Sophie. Surprised we decided to start the renovation today. I know you were being stubborn, but once you see the transformation, you'll thank me. This cold, sterile look is so outdated. Stop! Sophie stepped forward, glass from a shattered tile crunching under her feet. Stop right now. Don't be dramatic, Richard said, hefting the sledgehammer again. We're doing you a favor adding value. That's what family does. This is destruction of property. This is illegal. Stop or I'm calling the police. Richard's face darkened. You'd call the cops on family, on the man who helped raise you. You're destroying my kitchen. Improving, Natalie corrected. And honestly, Sophie, your attitude is really hurtful. We're trying to help you. This kitchen screams desperate spinster. We're giving it life warmth, making it somewhere a real family would want to gather. Sophie pulled out her phone. Last warning, stop now or I'm calling 911. Richard moved faster than she expected. The sledgehammer dropped as he crossed the room in 3 strides. You ungrateful! His fist connected with Sophie's face before she could finish dialing. Pain exploded across her cheekbone as she stumbled backward, phone flying from her hand. She hit the wall hard, sliding down as her vision sparked. The room went silent for a moment. Then, unbelievably, the drilling resumed. Sophie tasted copper touched her lip, found blood. Richard stood over her fists, still clenched. Should have done that years ago. Thought you were too good for us even as a kid. Always had to be different, special, better than everyone else. Richard, Eric said nervously. Keep working, Richard barked. She's not calling anyone. Are you, Sophie? Because I know people at the department. They know about your history of exaggeration, your difficulty with family relationships. Who do you think they'll believe? Natalie knelt beside Sophie, her voice sugary with false concern. Just let us finish, Sophie. Fighting will only make it worse. In a few days, you'll have a gorgeous new kitchen, and this will all be a funny story. Remember when Sophie freaked out about her kitchen renovation? Sophie struggled to her feet, jaw throbbing, room tilting slightly. They'd gone back to work, her beautiful cabinets being wrenched from the walls, the tile backsplash she'd imported from Italy being chiseled away. Everything she'd built, everything she'd saved, for everything that represented her success and independence, destroyed. I'm leaving, she managed through swollen lips. When I come back, you'll all be gone. Richard laughed. Where are you going to go? Hotels are expensive. Oh, wait, you've got money, don't you? Must be nice looking down on family from your high horse. Sophie grabbed her purse, nothing else. Behind her, Natalie called out cheerfully, Drive safe, we'll have such a surprise for you when you get back. She made it to her car on unsteady legs. In the rearview mirror, she saw one of Eric's crew carrying her wolf range out the front door, $15,000, being loaded into a pickup truck like scrap metal. But Sophie smiled through the pain. They thought they'd won. They thought she was the same scared girl who'd hidden in her room while Richard raged and her mother made excuses. They thought she'd come crawling back, accept their violation of her space, maybe even thank them eventually. They had no idea who she'd become in the year since leaving their toxicity behind. Success hadn't just given Sophie a beautiful home. It had given her resources, connections, and most importantly, the backbone to use them. She drove to the Grand Fairview Hotel, where the concierge knew her by name from numerous client meetings. One look at her face and the woman was offering ice and asking if she needed medical attention. Yes, Sophie said, settling into a leather chair in the quiet lobby. I need to call quite a few people, actually. The concierge Margaret brought her a bag of ice wrapped in a soft towel. Should I call the police, Ms. Bennett? Not yet, Sophie said, holding the ice to her swelling cheek. I need to make some other calls first. Margaret nodded, understanding. The business suite is available if you need privacy. And Dr. Morrison is in the building for the medical conference. I could ask him to take a look at that. 20 minutes later, Sophie sat in the quiet business suite with the documented medical examination photos of her injuries and a borrowed laptop. Dr. Morrison had been thorough, professionally noting the contusion pattern, consistent with a closed fist strike, the swelling, the split lip. He'd offered to call the police himself, but Sophie had asked him to wait. Her first call was to James Whitman, her attorney. They'd worked together on several contract disputes with clients, and he knew she wasn't prone to dramatics. Sophie, what's wrong? He could hear something in her voice. She explained calmly and chronologically the invasion of her home, the destruction of her kitchen, the assault. By the time she finished, she could hear him typing furiously. First things first, are you safe now? Yes, I'm at the Grand Fairview. Good, stay there. I'm sending my investigator to your house right now to document everything, every bit of damage, every person present. Did you have security cameras? Sophie's heart sank. Only at the front door. That's something. We'll work with it. Now, let's talk about your options. They strategized for 30 minutes, criminal charges for assault and destruction of property, civil suits for damages, restraining orders, eviction procedures. James was thorough, methodical, and angry on her behalf. Sophie's next call was to Mike Harrison, the locksmith, who'd installed her current locks. Emergency service, she said. I need every lock changed today. There will be people in the house who won't leave willingly. How many people we talking about? 8 to 10, they're destroying my kitchen. A pause. You need more than a locksmith, Ms. Bennett. You need backup. Let me make some calls. I know some security folks who can ensure a smooth transition. The third call was to her insurance agent. The woman listened in horror as Sophie described the deliberate destruction. We have documentation of every appliance, every finish, Sophie told her. The kitchen was featured in Modern Home Design last month. This wasn't renovation, it's malicious destruction of property worth over $70,000. Send me everything, the agent said. Photos, receipts, the magazine feature. If they did what you're describing, this goes beyond a simple claim. This is criminal. By 3 o'clock, Sophie was orchestrating a response from her hotel suite. James's investigator, a former cop named Torres, was sending her video from her house. The destruction was worse than she'd seen. They'd torn out the gas lines. The walls were damaged where cabinets had been ripped away, and her professional range was gone, likely sold already. There's more, Torres said over the phone. I talked to your neighbors. This has been going on all weekend. They thought you'd authorized it, but Mrs. Chen next door has doorbell footage of them loading your appliances into trucks. Clear faces, license plates, your stepfather directing the whole thing. Sophie's fourth call was to 3 former clients whose high-end projects Natalie had ruined with her incompetence. Each confirmed they'd be happy to provide statements about her pattern of destruction and professional misconduct. She told us she was your partner, one said. Took a deposit and disappeared. We only got resolution when you personally stepped in. By 5 o'clock, Mike the locksmith called back. I've got a team ready. 3 security professionals, all licensed and bonded. We can be there in an hour. Fair warning, if they refuse to leave, this could get heated. They're destroying my property, Sophie replied. Whatever it takes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Sophie, where are you? Natalie says you hit Richard and stormed out. This is ridiculous. Come home and apologize. Sophie stared at the message, fury building. Even now, even with her face swollen and her home being ransacked, she was the problem. She was the one who needed to apologize. She didn't respond. Instead, she called Channel 7's tip line. Lindsay Cruz, an investigative reporter she'd met at a design showcase, had given Sophie her direct number. Lindsay, it's Sophie Bennett. Remember that story you wanted to do about contractor fraud? I've got something bigger. The reporter was very interested. A respected professional woman, a business owner, assaulted in her own home, while family members destroyed her property, with documentation. Can you give me an exclusive? Lindsay asked. If you can have a crew at my house by 7 tonight, you can film the whole thing. Sophie's final call of the afternoon was to her bank. She moved money from savings to checking, authorized a large cash withdrawal, and put a freeze on the credit card she'd foolishly let Natalie use for emergencies in the past. By 6:30, Sophie was in Mike's van with his security team, her face cleaned up but still visibly bruised. James had advised her to return with witnesses. The goal, said Marcus, the lead security officer, was to secure your property with minimal confrontation. But if they've destroyed what you say they have, they might not go quietly. I understand. And Richard, he's violent. Sophie touched her swollen cheek. Marcus's expression hardened. Then you stay in the van until we give the all clear. No arguments. They pulled up to find the destruction had continued. A dumpster now sat in Sophie's driveway, filled with the remnants of her kitchen. Through the windows, she could see people moving around Eric's crew, still working despite the late hour. Showtime, Marcus said. They moved in formation, professional and imposing. Sophie watched from the van as Marcus knocked on her own front door. Natalie answered her confusion, evident even from a distance. The conversation was brief. She gestured wildly, pointed back toward the house, shook her head. Marcus remained calm, showing paperwork the eviction notice James had prepared, the documentation of ownership. Richard appeared behind Natalie, chest puffed out clearly trying to intimidate. Marcus didn't budge. One of his team members was already changing the front door lock while they talked. Then Richard spotted Sophie in the van. His face contorted with rage as he pushed past Natalie, storming down the driveway. Marcus smoothly intercepted him. "Sir, you need to collect your belongings and leave the premises. That's my daughter in there. This is a family matter." "She's the homeowner, you're trespassing. The police have been notified and are en route." As if on cue, Lindsay's news van rounded the corner. The camera was already rolling as her team piled out, capturing Richard's red face, his clenched fists, the destroyed kitchen visible through the windows. "Mr. Morgan," Lindsay called out, recognizing him from his city planning position. "Can you explain why you're destroying Ms. Bennett's kitchen?" Richard turned, saw the cameras, and his public persona kicked in. The transformation was instant angry bully to concerned family man. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "We're helping with renovations, family helping family." "Then why does Ms. Bennett have a bruised face?" Lindsay pressed. "Why are the police coming?" The arrival of 2 patrol cars ended any pretense. Sophie stepped out of the van, let them see her face, showed them Dr. Morrison's documentation. Torres appeared with his tablet showing the officer's video of the destruction. "Ma'am," the senior officer said, "do you want to press charges?" Sophie looked at Richard, at Natalie, who was now crying dramatically for the cameras at Eric's crew, who were trying to slink away with their tools. "Yes," she said clearly. "Assault, destruction of property, theft, trespassing, all of it." The next hour was controlled chaos. Richard was arrested, his complaints about family misunderstandings falling on deaf ears when the officers saw the demolished kitchen and Sophie's documented injuries. Natalie screamed about Sophie ruining her life, about family betrayal, about how Sophie had always been jealous of her. Eric tried to claim his crew was just following orders, that they'd been told Sophie approved everything. The officers weren't buying it, especially when Mrs. Chen arrived with her doorbell footage showing them loading Sophie's appliances into their trucks. Through it all, Lindsay's crew captured everything the destroyed kitchen worth, more than many people's annual salaries. The entitled family members who'd felt they had the right to take what Sophie had built, the bruise on her face that spoke louder than any words about how far they'd been willing to go. As the police cars pulled away with Richard in custody, as Natalie and Eric packed their children into their van, with Marcus's team supervising as the locksmith finished securing her violated home, Sophie stood in her destroyed kitchen and felt something unexpected: relief. They'd shown their true colors in a way that no family gathering, no awkward dinner, no guilty phone call could have. They'd broken more than her kitchen. They'd broken any obligation she might have felt to maintain ties with people who saw her success as something to be taken rather than celebrated. Lindsay approached microphone in hand. "Ms. Bennett, how do you feel about what's happened here today?" Sophie looked around the destroyed space, thought about the months of work ahead, the insurance claims, the legal battles. Then she thought about the security cameras being installed tomorrow, the restraining orders being filed, the bridges thoroughly burned. "I feel free," she said. "Finally completely free." The Grand Fairview Hotel became Sophie's temporary headquarters. That first night she barely slept. Adrenaline and fury kept her wired until dawn. But those sleepless hours weren't wasted, she was planning. James arrived at 7 a.m. sharp with a legal strategy that would have made military generals proud. "Richard's being arraigned at 10, he said, spreading documents across the dining table of Sophie's suite. "The assault charge is solid. We have medical documentation, witness testimony from the crew, and your neighbor's footage shows him pursuing you aggressively before you disappeared inside." "What about bail?" Sophie asked, nursing her second cup of coffee. The swelling around her eye had darkened overnight into a purple crescent. "He'll likely get it, but we're pushing for conditions: no contact order, stay away from your property." James shuffled through his papers. The prosecution seems motivated. Apparently, Richard's made enemies in the city planning office. Several people are quite happy to see him in handcuffs. Sophie's insurance adjuster, Patricia Stern, arrived next. She walked through the video Torres had taken, her expression growing more severe with each frame. "This is deliberate destruction," she said. "Not renovation, not improvement. They destroyed load-bearing elements, damaged gas lines, created genuine safety hazards." She tapped her tablet, calculating. "Your policy covers this, but we'll be pursuing them for full reimbursement." "How much are we talking about?" Sophie asked, bracing herself. Patricia looked up from her calculations. "The kitchen alone with the custom work, the appliances, several of which seem to be missing. We're looking at 90,000 minimum. That doesn't include structural repairs, the damage to other rooms from their equipment, or emotional distress." 90,000, Sophie repeated. More than Natalie and Eric had probably ever seen in their lives. "I've seen your work, Ms. Bennett. I know what that kitchen meant professionally." Patricia closed her tablet. "We'll make this right, but it won't be quick. You'll need somewhere to stay for at least 2 months." By afternoon, Sophie was fielding calls from reporters. Lindsay's segment had aired on the morning news, and the visual of a successful woman's home being destroyed by entitled relatives had struck a chord. Her phone buzzed with interview requests, but James advised selectivity. "You want to control the narrative," he said. "Too much publicity could backfire, make you look vindictive, but strategic appearances puts pressure on them to settle." Sophie's first stop after the hotel was her violated home, accompanied by Marcus and his team. In daylight, the destruction was even worse. They hadn't just demolished the kitchen, they'd been planning a complete takeover. Natalie's inventory filled Sophie's office. Eric's tools occupied every corner. They'd even started painting her living room that nauseating farmhouse white. "Boss," Marcus called from the garage, "you need to see this." Sophie's garage workshop had been ransacked. Professional tools she'd collected over 15 years were missing. Her grandmother's antique drafting table, the one she'd restored herself, had been disassembled and stacked carelessly against the wall. She documented everything, her anger crystallizing into cold determination. This wasn't just about a kitchen anymore. This was about people who believed their relation to her gave them rights to everything she'd built. That evening, her mother finally called. Sophie had been expecting it, had prepared herself for the guilt, the manipulation. "How could you—" Eleanor was crying, of course. "Richard in jail, the children traumatized, and for what? A kitchen? He assaulted me, Mom." Sophie touched her bruised face, still tender under her makeup. "He was trying to help. You've always been so sensitive, so dramatic. One little tap and you destroy our entire family." Sophie laughed. Actually laughed. "One little tap, I have medical documentation of a closed fist punch. I have witnesses. I have video of him destroying $90,000 of my property." "Money. That's all you care about." "No, Mom, I care about respect. I care about boundaries. I care about not being assaulted in my own home." "Natalie's business is ruined." Her reputation was ruined long before this. Ask Sarah Martinez about the deposit Natalie took and never returned. Ask the Washingtons about the bathroom she demolished and abandoned. "I've protected her from consequences for years. No more." The line went quiet then, in a smaller voice. "What am I supposed to do?" "Whatever you want. But if it involves taking Richard's side over mine, don't expect me to be part of it." Eleanor hung up. Sophie blocked her number, then Natalie's, then every extended family member who might try to guilt her into dropping charges. The liberation was intoxicating. Over the following days, Sophie threw herself into strategic planning. Her clients, horrified by what had happened, rallied around her. Several offered their guest houses, their vacation homes. The design community was small, and word traveled fast about what Natalie had done. "She called me yesterday," one client confided, "trying to get work claiming you two were partners. I told her I'd sooner hire my teenager." The criminal case moved with surprising speed. Richard's attorney, a public defender overwhelmed with cases, tried to negotiate. "My client is willing to apologize," he offered during a meeting. "This was a family misunderstanding that got out of hand." "Your client assaulted me and destroyed my property," Sophie replied. "He can apologize to the judge." Meanwhile, the civil suits were lining up beautifully. 3 of Natalie's former victims had agreed to testify about her pattern of fraud. The contractor's licensing board was investigating Eric's crew for operating without proper permits. And Richard, his position with city planning was under review. "Turns out," James told Sophie gleefully, "he's been using city resources for personal projects. Your neighbor's footage shows a city vehicle at your house during the destruction. His boss is displeased." The best part was the social media explosion. Lindsay's follow-up pieces had gained traction, and suddenly Sophie was receiving messages from people nationwide who dealt with similar entitled relatives. A Facebook group formed Successful Women Against Toxic Families. The stories poured in siblings who'd stolen inheritances, parents who'd demanded house keys, relatives who'd felt entitled to success they hadn't earned. 2 weeks into her hotel stay, Sophie met with a contractor about repairs. Walking through her destroyed kitchen was painful, but also cathartic. "We can rebuild exactly as it was," he offered. Sophie shook her head. "No, better. I want a kitchen that makes the old one look amateur. I want anyone who sees it to understand what was destroyed and what rose from those ashes." He grinned. "I like the way you think." Richard's trial date was set for 6 weeks out. He'd made bail, but the conditions were strict. The restraining order covered not just Sophie, but her property and workplace. One violation, and he'd be back in custody. Natalie, meanwhile, was spiraling on social media. Her business page became a masterclass in what not to do in a crisis. She posted rants about ungrateful sisters, about family betrayal, about how she was being persecuted for trying to help. Each post was screenshot and sent to Sophie's lawyer, more evidence of her refusal to accept responsibility. "She's making our case for us," James observed. "No jury will sympathize with someone this entitled." The financial pressure was getting to them. Eric's crew faced their own legal troubles. Turns out destroying someone's property on camera isn't great for business. Several had already agreed to testify against Richard and Natalie in exchange for lesser charges. "They're turning on each other," Torres reported after his latest investigation. "Eric's blaming Natalie for the idea. Natalie's blaming Richard for escalating. Richard's blaming you for overreacting. It's beautiful." 3 weeks after the destruction, Sophie received an unexpected call, her mother using a friend's phone to bypass the block. "Please," Eleanor said without preamble. "Richard's lost his job. Natalie can't get clients. They're going to lose everything." A pause. And I need you to understand, I'm caught in the middle. He's my husband who assaulted your daughter." For the first time, Sophie heard fear in her mother's voice, real fear. It occurred to her that she'd been so focused on her own escape from that house, she'd never considered what Eleanor might be enduring. "Mom," Sophie said carefully, "are you safe?" A long pause. "I don't know anymore." "Do you want to leave?" Another pause. "I don't know how. Everything's in his name. I haven't worked in 20 years. Where would I go?" Sophie made a decision that surprised her. "I'll have James call you, not to discuss my case, to discuss your options." Quietly, Eleanor started crying. "After everything, why would you help me?" "Because you're right. I don't understand what it's like being married to Richard, but I understand what it's like being his target. And nobody should live like that." It was the first crack in Sophie's armor of anger, but it felt right. Her mother was a victim too, in her own way. Helping Eleanor escape Richard wasn't forgiveness for choosing him over Sophie. It was recognition that the cycle of abuse trapped more than just the obvious victims. As week 4 arrived, the pressure on Richard and Natalie intensified. The criminal charges were solid, the civil suits promised financial ruin, their reputations were destroyed, and now with Eleanor quietly consulting divorce attorneys, their family structure was crumbling. Monday morning of week 4 brought the security team Sophie had hired to monitor her property. 3 shifts, 24-hour coverage, all former military or law enforcement. It seemed excessive until they called her that very afternoon. "Ms. Bennett, we've got a situation. Your sister and 2 men are parked across the street watching the house." Sophie pulled up the security app on her phone. There they were. Natalie in the driver's seat of a rental car, Eric beside her, and one of his crew members in the back. They'd been there for 2 hours. "Document everything," Sophie instructed. "If they approach the property, call the police immediately." James was ecstatic when Sophie informed him. "They're violating the restraining order just by being there. This is gift-wrapped evidence of harassment." But Sophie wanted more than violations. She wanted to understand their next move. Torres volunteered to do surveillance, and within days, he had disturbing information. "They're desperate," he reported. Natalie's been reaching out to hard money lenders trying to get cash. She's telling people you have hidden valuables in the house, that she knows where you keep cash. I don't keep cash in the house. They don't know that. And here's the concerning part: Eric's been in contact with some questionable people, ex-cons from his construction network, the kind who do jobs off the books, if you understand me. Sophie understood perfectly. They were escalating from destruction to potential theft, or worse. The security footage from the next few nights proved Torres right. Different vehicles cruised slowly past her house at odd hours. One man actually got out and photographed her security cameras before driving away. Time to go on offense, James decided. We file for an emergency hearing. This is conspiracy to commit burglary on top of everything else. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Sophie spent Wednesday gathering every piece of evidence. The security footage, Torres's surveillance reports, screenshots of Natalie's increasingly unhinged social media posts where she claimed Sophie had stolen her design ideas and sabotaged her business. That night, Sophie's phone rang with a blocked number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "You think you're so smart." Natalie's voice was different, harder, meaner. The mask had completely fallen away. "But you can't stay in that hotel forever. You can't hide behind lawyers and security guards for the rest of your life." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality. You destroyed my family, my business, my future. You think I'm just going to walk away?" "Natalie, you destroyed my kitchen. Richard assaulted me. You did this to yourselves." She laughed, ugly and bitter. "That kitchen, that was nothing. I wanted to burn the whole place down. Still might." Sophie hit record on her phone, grateful for the app James had recommended. "You're threatening arson now." "I'm done threatening. You want to play hardball, fine. But remember, I know things about you, about your business, about where you go, who you meet. You can't watch your back every second." The line went dead. Sophie immediately sent the recording to James and the police. Within an hour, officers were at her hotel taking a statement. Thursday's emergency hearing was a massacre. The judge, already unsympathetic to Richard and Natalie's renovation gone wrong defense, listened to the threatening phone call with visible disgust. "Mrs. Patterson," he addressed Natalie directly, "you seem to be under the impression that family relationships exempt you from the law. They do not. Your actions show a pattern of escalation that deeply concerns this court." Richard's attorney tried to argue that the surveillance was circumstantial, that sitting in a car wasn't illegal. The judge cut him off. "Counselor, your clients were ordered to stay away from Ms. Bennett's property. Away doesn't mean across the street. It means away. The fact that they're conducting surveillance suggests intent to commit further crimes." The restraining orders were strengthened and extended. But more importantly, bail was revoked for both Richard and Natalie based on the new evidence of conspiracy and threats. They were remanded to custody pending trial. The courtroom erupted. Natalie screamed about injustice, about family, about how Sophie had ruined her life. Richard tried to maintain his dignity, but Sophie saw his hands shaking as the bailiffs cuffed him. Their supporters, a handful of Eric's crew, and some extended family. Sophie, barely recognized, glared at her as she left. In the hallway, Eric approached. Marcus stepped between them, but Eric raised his hands peacefully. "I just wanted to say I'm out. This has gone too far." He looked exhausted, the confident contractor reduced to a worried father. "I'll testify, tell the truth about everything. I just want to take my kids and start over somewhere else." Sophie studied him, looking for deception. "What about Natalie?" His face twisted. "She's changed. Or maybe I'm just finally seeing who she always was. Either way, we're done. I filed for divorce and sole custody." It was the first genuinely human moment from any of them. Sophie nodded. "Tell your lawyer to contact mine. If you cooperate fully, I won't pursue damages against you personally." Relief flooded his face. "Thank you. And I'm sorry about your kitchen, your face, all of it. I should have stopped it." As he walked away, Sophie realized the family was completely imploding. Richard and Natalie in jail, Eric fleeing with the children, Eleanor secretly planning divorce. The toxic structure that had enabled their behavior for so long was finally collapsing. That evening, Sophie met with her insurance adjuster at the house. The restoration was progressing beautifully. Where destruction had reigned, skilled craftspeople were creating something even better. The new kitchen would feature hand-carved walnut details, a Le Cornu range that made her old wolf look pedestrian, and countertops of rare Patagonian quartzite. "It's going to be stunning," Patricia said, "and every penny will be recovered from their assets." "What assets?" Sophie asked. "They're broke," Patricia smiled. "Richard had a retirement account. Natalie and Eric own their house well owned. The liens have already been filed." She paused. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Chen, she's suing them too for emotional distress from witnessing the assault. Turns out she's quite fond of you." The next few weeks blurred together. The criminal trial for assault was swift with video evidence, and multiple witnesses. Richard's conviction was assured. He got 18 months, though he'd likely serve 6 with good behavior. The destruction of property charges would be tried separately, promising more jail time. Natalie's trial was more complex. The threats, the conspiracy evidence, the pattern of fraud with previous clients, it all painted a picture of someone who'd used family connections to avoid consequences for years. Until now. The media coverage intensified. Lindsay did a follow-up series on family financial abuse featuring experts who explained how successful women were often targeted by relatives who felt entitled to their achievements. Sophie's story became a cautionary tale and, surprisingly, an inspiration. "You gave me courage," one message read. "My brother-in-law has been living in my house for 3 years, refusing to leave. After seeing your story, I hired a lawyer." Another, "My sister destroyed my wedding dress because she was jealous. Everyone said to let it go. Because family. You showed me that family doesn't mean doormat." 6 weeks after the destruction, Sophie finally moved back home. The house felt different not just because of the renovations, but because the ghosts of toxic relationships no longer haunted its rooms. The new kitchen was a masterpiece, every detail perfect, every surface speaking to both her success and her survival. She hosted a housewarming party for the clients and colleagues who'd supported her. As they gathered around her new island glasses of wine in hand, someone asked if she regretted anything. "No," Sophie said without hesitation. "They showed me who they really were. And more importantly, they showed me who I am, someone who won't accept abuse even from family. Especially from family." Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. She was staying with her sister in Portland, the divorce papers filed. "I'm proud of you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see clearly." Sophie didn't respond immediately. Their relationship would take time to rebuild if it could be rebuilt at all. But for the first time in her life, she was operating from a position of strength, not obligation. As her guests admired the kitchen, complimented the restoration, celebrated her resilience, Sophie thought about Richard and Natalie in their respective cells. They'd wanted to break her to punish her for succeeding where they'd failed. Instead, they'd freed her from the last chains of toxic obligation. The doorbell rang. Marcus checked the camera before nodding. It was Lindsay with her camera operator. "Ready for the final interview?" she asked. Sophie smoothed her dress, touched the spot where Richard's fist had landed, now healed without a trace, and smiled. "Let's show them how the story ends." Lindsay positioned her crew in Sophie's restored kitchen, the afternoon light catching the Patagonian quartzite countertops in a way that made them glow like captured sunset. The contrast between this moment and that terrible day was intentional. They both understood the power of visual storytelling. "Let's start with the legal outcomes," Lindsay began. "Richard convicted of assault, Natalie facing multiple charges. How does justice feel?" Sophie considered the question carefully. "Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about prevention. They can't hurt anyone else now, and that matters more than my personal satisfaction." "The financial recovery, can you walk us through that?" "Insurance covered the immediate repairs, but the civil suits are where real accountability happens. Between the destruction, theft of appliances, and emotional distress, we're pursuing damages of over $300,000. My attorney has already placed liens on their assets." Lindsay leaned forward. "Some viewers have criticized you for being vindictive for destroying a family over property damage." Sophie had expected this. Those viewers haven't been punched in the face by someone who supposedly loved them. They haven't watched their life's work demolished by people who felt entitled to it. This isn't about property. It's about patterns of abuse that escalate when left unchecked. "Tell us about the support you've received." "It's been overwhelming. Other women sharing similar stories, offering resources, creating networks." Sophie paused, looking directly into the camera. We've actually started a foundation, the Independent Women's Legal Fund, to help women who can't afford the legal response I could. Lindsay's eyes widened. This was new information. A foundation launching next month. We've already raised $200,000 in seed money from women who face similar family exploitation. Pro bono attorneys are volunteering because not everyone can afford to fight back, but everyone deserves to. After the interview wrapped, Sophie had another meeting, this one more challenging. Eric had requested to see her before leaving town with his children. Against Marcus's advice, Sophie agreed, but only in a public setting. They met at a coffee shop downtown, Marcus positioned nearby. Eric looked older or exhausted, his construction swagger replaced by something almost humble. I wanted to thank you, he began, for not including me in the financial pursuit, for letting me cooperate. You're testifying truthfully, that's all I required. He nodded, fidgeting with his coffee cup. The kids ask about their mom. I don't know what to tell them. Tell them the truth, age appropriately. Their mother made choices that had consequences. Hiding from that helps no one. Jason blames himself, says if he hadn't complained about the apartment being too small, none of this would have happened. Sophie's heart squeezed. The children were victims too, in their way. Would you accept help? There's a family counselor I know specializes in helping kids process family trauma. Eric's eyes welled up. I can't afford, I'll cover it. The kids didn't ask for any of this. Eric stared at her, disbelief warring with gratitude. After everything. Why? Because cycles break with kindness, not just consequences. Your children deserve better than what they've witnessed. As Eric left, promising to call the counselor, Sophie reflected on how revenge had evolved into something more complex. Yes, she'd pursued every legal avenue against Richard and Natalie, but she was also building something positive from the wreckage. The next few days brought a flurry of legal activity. Richard's attorney attempted one last negotiation, a guilty plea, in exchange for no jail time, just probation and restitution. Absolutely not, James told them. He assaulted a woman in her home. He serves time. The criminal trial for property destruction began the following Monday. Sophie testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through every violated boundary, every ignored request, every escalation that led to that devastating day. They didn't just destroy a kitchen, she explained. They destroyed my sense of safety, my trust in family, my peace in my own home. When someone shows such callous disregard for your boundaries, for your property, for your physical safety, that's not renovation. That's domination. The prosecutor played the security footage. Several jurors gasped when they saw Richard's sledgehammer connect with Sophie's pristine countertops. Others shook their heads at Natalie, directing the destruction like a demented conductor. Richard took the stand in his own defense, attempting to paint himself as a helpful father figure, whose efforts were misunderstood. The prosecutor destroyed him with a single question. If you were helping, why did you hit her? His attorney objected, noting that assault was a separate charge. The judge overruled the assault, spoke to intent, to the mindset behind the destruction. Richard's mask slipped. She needed to learn respect, he muttered. The courtroom went silent. Even his own attorney looked defeated. Natalie's testimony was worse. She portrayed herself as a victim of Sophie's jealousy, claimed Sophie had sabotaged her business ventures out of spite. My sister had advantages I never did, she whined. It's not fair that she gets to live in luxury while I struggle. The prosecutor's response was cutting. So you decided to take what wasn't yours. It should have been mine. Natalie's voice rose. I have children. She has nothing but her precious career. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One, a professional woman about Sophie's age, looked particularly disgusted. The verdict came back in under 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Destruction of property, conspiracy theft. Combined with the assault conviction, Richard faced up to 5 years, Natalie 3. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, Sophie focused on positive action. The Independent Women's Legal Fund officially launched with a gala in her restored home. 60 women attended, each with their own story of family financial abuse. My brother stole my identity and ruined my credit. My stepmother convinced my elderly father to disinherit me after I paid for his care for years. My cousin started a business using my name and reputation, then disappeared with client deposits. Story after story, pattern after pattern. They weren't isolated cases. They were an epidemic of successful women being punished for their achievements by those who felt entitled to share them without effort. 3 weeks before sentencing, Sophie received a letter through James. Eleanor writing from Portland. Sophie, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that I see it now. All of it. How Richard manipulated and controlled. How I enabled him by choosing peace over protection. How Natalie learned that taking was easier than earning. I failed you as a mother. I chose a man over my daughter. Chose comfortable lies over difficult truths. I'm in therapy now trying to understand why. The divorce is final next month. I'm working again retail, nothing glamorous, but it's mine. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your strength in standing up to them gave me strength too. Sophie read it twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday they'd rebuild something, maybe not. The choice was hers now, not obligations. Sentencing day arrived with unexpected drama. Natalie had fired her public defender and hired a new attorney with money from somewhere Sophie suspected Richard's hidden assets. This attorney came out swinging filing motions to reduce charges, claiming mental distress, demanding a psychological evaluation. James was unfazed. Desperation moves, the conviction stands. In her pre-sentencing statement, Natalie tried one last manipulation. She spoke of her children missing their mother, of how prison would destroy their lives, of how Sophie was heartlessly orphaning them for a simple misunderstanding. Sophie was allowed a victim impact statement in response. She'd prepared carefully, but in the moment she spoke from the heart. Natalie wants mercy she never showed me. She speaks of her children, but what lesson does it teach them if there are no consequences for destroying someone else's life? That statement she just made, it's the same manipulation she's always used, weaponizing motherhood to avoid accountability. Her children deserve better than a mother who teaches them that taking is acceptable if you're family. Prison might be the first honest consequence she's ever faced. Maybe it will teach her what my boundaries couldn't. The judge's decision was swift: 3 years for Natalie, 4 for Richard, with possibility of parole in half that time. Restitution to be paid from any current or future assets. As they were led away, Natalie turned to Sophie one last time. No more tears, no more manipulation, just pure hatred. "This isn't over," she mouthed, but it was at least this chapter. That night, Sophie hosted a small dinner party in her perfect kitchen. Friends who'd supported her clients, who'd become family, her new chosen tribe. They cooked together, laughed together, filled her home with the warmth Natalie had tried to manufacture through destruction. To boundaries, someone toasted. To consequences, another added. To freedom. Sophie concluded, raising her glass to catch the light just like her countertops. The evening news played in the background, Lindsay's final segment on the case, highlighting not just the verdict, but the foundation. The movement of women refusing to be victimized by entitled relatives. Sophie's phone buzzed with a message from Eric. A photo of Jason and Lily at their new school in Arizona, smiling. "Counseling is helping. Kids are adjusting. Thank you for giving us a chance to start over." Sophie smiled, then put the phone away. The past was settled. The foundation was launched. Her home was hers again, better than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new designs, new possibilities. But tonight, surrounded by people who respected her success instead of resenting it, she was exactly where she belonged. The media explosion started small. Lindsay's final segment went viral overnight. Kitchen Destroyer began trending on Twitter, with thousands sharing their own stories of entitled relatives. But it was what happened next that changed everything. "We want to feature your story on 60 Minutes, the producer explained during their video call. "This isn't just about one family's crime. It's about a societal pattern of successful women being targeted by relatives who believe blood relation equals ownership." James advised caution. "National exposure brings scrutiny. Are you prepared for that?" Sophie thought about all the women who'd reached out, desperate for hope that they too could fight back. "Yes, if it helps even one person, it's worth it." The interview was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, the legal machinery continued grinding. Richard's city planning connections once his protection had become his liability. An internal investigation revealed years of using city resources for personal gain, including procuring permits for under-the-table construction projects with Eric's crew. Federal charges, James informed Sophie gleefully. Wire fraud, misuse of municipal resources, tax evasion on the unreported income. He's looking at an additional 10 years minimum. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. One of Eric's former crew members, seeking leniency on his own charges, revealed something stunning. Richard and Natalie had done this before. There were 2 other houses, he testified in a deposition Sophie watched via video link. Both women, both successful, both relatives of Richard's through his first marriage. They'd move in, claim renovations, destroy the valuable stuff to sell, then claim it was an accident. The women were too intimidated to press charges. Sophie's blood ran cold. She wasn't their first victim, just their first failure. Torres tracked down both women. Margaret Hanson, Richard's cousin, had lost a Victorian home worth $500,000. She'd been too frightened of Richard to pursue charges. Elena Ruiz, related through Richard's first wife, had her art studio destroyed, years of work vanished overnight. "I thought I was alone," Margaret sobbed during their video call. "I thought it was my fault for letting them in." "You weren't alone," Sophie assured her. "And it's not too late for justice." Both women agreed to testify about the pattern of behavior. The prosecutor amended charges to include racketeering, a pattern of criminal enterprise. Richard and Natalie weren't just toxic relatives. They were serial predators who'd weaponized family bonds for profit. The 60 Minutes taping took place in Sophie's restored kitchen. Anderson Cooper himself conducted the interview, his silver hair and serious demeanor lending gravity to the story. But it wasn't just Sophie's story anymore. Margaret and Elena had agreed to appear, making it an examination of systematic family exploitation. "These aren't isolated incidents," Anderson said to the camera. "Across America, successful women report similar patterns. Relatives who feel entitled to their achievements, who escalate from emotional manipulation to financial abuse to outright crime." The program included expert testimony from Dr. Sarah Crenley, a psychologist specializing in family financial abuse. "We socialize women to prioritize family harmony over personal boundaries. Predators within families exploit this conditioning. They know their victims will hesitate to involve law enforcement, will question themselves, will absorb tremendous damage before fighting back." But the most powerful moment came when they showed the destruction footage. America watched Richard swing that sledgehammer, heard Natalie directing the demolition, saw Sophie's beautiful kitchen reduced to rubble. Then they saw the restoration and understood this wasn't just about property, but about refusing to let abuse define the ending. The response was overwhelming. The Independent Women's Legal Fund website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in, they raised $3 million in the first week. Law firms volunteered pro bono hours. Politicians called for legislation addressing family financial abuse. But there was backlash too. Men's rights groups painted Sophie as vindictive. Some extended family members gave interviews claiming she'd always been difficult and thought she was better than everyone. Natalie's supporters started a GoFundMe for her appeal, though it raised less than $1,000. The real vindication came at Richard's federal trial. With the new evidence of serial predation, his facade crumbled entirely. The jury saw him not as a misguided stepfather, but as a calculated criminal who'd used family connections to identify and exploit victims. Margaret testified about losing her grandmother's home. "He convinced me that family helps family, that renovation would increase the value. Instead, he gutted it, sold everything valuable, and left me with a shell I couldn't afford to repair." Elena spoke of years spent rebuilding her art career after Richard destroyed her studio. "He said artists were parasites, that I needed to learn about real work. 20 years of paintings gone, my kiln destroyed, my supplies sold because he decided my success wasn't legitimate." When Sophie's turn came, she focused on the pattern. He chose women who'd achieved something without him, who'd built lives that proved his worldview wrong. The destruction was never about renovation. It was about punishment. The federal verdict was decisive, guilty on all counts. The racketeering charge alone carried 20 years. Combined with state convictions, Richard would likely die in prison. Natalie's situation deteriorated further when she foolishly agreed to a jailhouse interview, thinking she could garner sympathy. Instead, she revealed herself completely ranting about unfairness, about how successful women had stolen opportunities from real mothers, about how Sophie destroyed her family out of jealousy. "She's not even married," she spat at the interviewer. "No kids, no real family, just her precious career and her perfect house. It's unnatural. We were trying to show her what really matters." The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. Natalie became the face of entitled relatives everywhere her words memed and mocked across social media. Real mothers trended for days. 6 months after the destruction, Sophie stood before Congress testifying in support of the Family Financial Abuse Prevention Act. The legislation would make it easier to pursue criminal charges when relatives exploited family bonds for financial gain, and would provide resources for victims afraid to come forward. "Family should be where we're safest," she told the assembled representatives. "When that trust is weaponized against us, the betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's crime. We need laws that recognize this unique violation." The act passed with bipartisan support. The president signed it into law 3 months later. Sophie stood in the Oval Office surrounded by other survivors and thought about how far they'd all come from that day of destruction. But the sweetest vindication came in an unexpected form. A year after everything began, Sophie received a call from the American Institute of Kitchen Design. They wanted to feature her restored kitchen on their magazine cover, not just for its beauty, but for what it represented. "Resilience in design," the editor explained. "How destruction can lead to something even more beautiful. Your kitchen tells a story that resonates beyond aesthetics." The photo shoot was emotional. As photographers captured every angle of her rebuilt space, Sophie remembered standing in the rubble, Richard's punch still throbbing on her face, wondering if she'd ever feel safe here again. Now her kitchen wasn't just restored, it was transformed. Every surface spoke of survival. Every detail declared that destruction didn't get the final word. The magazine feature would reach every high-end designer in the country. Natalie's dreams of recognition achieved by the very person she tried to destroy. The foundation grew beyond Sophie's wildest dreams. They opened chapters in 12 cities, providing legal resources, safe temporary housing, and counseling for women facing family financial abuse. Corporate sponsors lined up, understanding that protecting successful women from predatory relatives was both moral and practical. Sophie hired staff real professionals who'd survived their own family exploitation. Together, they built something Richard and Natalie never could, a legitimate organization creating real change. One evening, as Sophie prepared dinner in her perfect kitchen, her phone rang. Eric calling from Arizona. "I wanted you to know the kids are doing great. Jason just won a science fair. Lily's in an art program. They're happy." "I'm glad, Eric. Really." "They asked if they could write to you to thank you for not including me in the lawsuits, for helping with the counseling. Would that be okay?" Sophie considered carefully. The children were innocent in all this, victims of their parents' choices. "Yes, they can write." The letters arrived a week later, careful childish handwriting on construction paper. Jason thanked her for giving his dad a second chance. Lily drew a picture of a kitchen with a smiling sun above it. "For your pretty house," she'd written. Sophie framed both letters and hung them in her office, reminders that breaking cycles of abuse could create space for healing even in unexpected places. As time passed, Sophie received an unusual visitor request. Eleanor wanted to meet for coffee. They chose neutral ground, a small cafe halfway between Sophie's home and Eleanor's new apartment. Her mother looked different, thinner, but somehow more substantial. The nervous energy that had always surrounded her was replaced by a quiet dignity. She'd cut her hair short, no longer wearing the style Richard had preferred. Small changes that spoke volumes. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Eleanor said, hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Sophie nodded, waiting. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it." Eleanor took a deep breath. "But I want you to know I'm trying to understand how I failed you so badly. My therapist calls it traumatic bonding, how I became so attached to Richard that I couldn't see the damage he was causing." "Did you know?" Sophie asked the question that had haunted her for months. About the other houses, the other women. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Not all of it. I suspected things. The way he'd come home with expensive items I knew we couldn't afford. How he'd target certain relatives. But I convinced myself it was just Richard being generous. Richard taking care of things. I didn't want to know. That's a choice, Mom. Yes. Eleanor wiped her eyes. The wrong one. Over and over. They talked for an hour. Not everything was resolved, not all wounds healed, but it was a beginning. I've been volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, Eleanor said as they prepared to leave. Just answering phones, helping with paperwork. Nothing glamorous. But I'm learning what to watch for the patterns I missed in my own life. Sophie studied her mother. Good, that's good. Eleanor hesitated. I've been thinking about speaking, sharing my story. Maybe at one of your foundation events. Showing other women like me, the enablers, the ones who choose wrong, that it's never too late to change sides. It was an unexpected offer, but one that made perfect sense. Who better to reach women trapped in abusive dynamics than someone who'd been there? I'll talk to the event coordinator, Sophie said. No promises, but it could help people. Eleanor's first speaking engagement was terrifying for both of them. Sophie introduced her to an audience of 200 women, all survivors of family financial abuse. Her mother stood at the podium, 63 years old, and starting over, and told her truth. I chose comfort over my daughter's safety. I chose a man's approval over my child's well-being. I told myself keeping peace was noble, but it was cowardice. Every woman here who stood up to family abuse has more courage than I showed for 20 years. I'm here to tell you that if someone like me who enabled abuse for decades can finally break free, anyone can. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of women approached her, sharing their own stories of mothers who'd chosen abusive partners over protective instincts. Eleanor wept with them, apologized to them, as she couldn't fully apologize to Sophie, and slowly began building her own path to redemption. The foundation evolved beyond even Sophie's ambitious dreams. They opened a legal clinic staffed by attorneys who'd survived their own family exploitation. They created safe houses for women fleeing financial abuse by relatives. They lobbied for stronger legislation and won in 7 more states. Corporate partnerships flourished. Tech companies, recognizing that family financial abuse often targeted their successful female employees, funded programs providing security consultations and legal resources. One CEO herself, a survivor of a brother who'd stolen her identity and destroyed her credit, donated $10 million to establish permanent endowments. But perhaps the most satisfying development came from Jason and Lily. As they grew older, understanding more about what had happened, they became vocal advocates against entitlement and exploitation. Jason, now in high school, wrote an essay about toxic family dynamics that won a national contest. My mother went to prison for destroying my aunt's kitchen, he wrote, but the real crime was teaching us that taking was easier than earning. My aunt's strength in demanding justice taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. Lily, following her aunt's footsteps, showed talent in design. She sent Sophie sketches, sometimes careful drawings of kitchens and living spaces. In her latest letter, she wrote, I want to create beautiful things like you, but I promise I'll only ever build, never destroy. The media attention eventually died down, replaced by new scandals and fresher outrages. But the work continued every week, brought new calls to the foundation, new women finding courage to stand against entitled relatives, new victories in courtrooms across the country. 5 years after the destruction, Sophie stood in her kitchen, still perfect, still hers, preparing for another gathering. This time it was a celebration, the 1,000th woman helped by the foundation, the 100th successful prosecution under the Family Financial Abuse Prevention Act, the formal establishment of their international chapters. Margaret was there, her Victorian home restored to glory. Elena displayed her new paintings, her career rebuilt and thriving. Eleanor, 5 years sober from her addiction to toxic relationships, helped serve appetizers, a small act of service that meant everything. Even Eric attended his new wife beside him. Children, now teenagers who'd grown into thoughtful, ethical young people despite their traumatic childhood. He'd built a legitimate construction business, specializing in restoration rather than destruction. "I need to tell you something," Eric said quietly while others mingled. "Natalie's parole hearing is next month. She's apparently found religion claims she's changed. She might get out." Sophie nodded unsurprised. "I know. Her lawyer sent notice. I'll be there to testify." "Aren't you afraid?" Sophie looked around her kitchen at the women laughing and sharing stories of survival and triumph at her mother. Finally, the protective figure she'd failed to be decades ago, at the young people choosing creation over destruction. "No," she said simply. "She has no power over me anymore. If she gets out and comes near me, she'll face consequences again. If she's truly changed, she'll build her own life away from mine. Either way, I'm protected by more than locks and lawyers now. I'm protected by truth." Eric smiled sadly. "I hope she has changed, for the kids' sake, if nothing else. But you don't believe it. Do you?" Sophie thought about those journals, the years of planning, the depth of entitlement that saw her success as theft from Natalie. "No, but I believe in consequences, and she's faced those." As the evening progressed, Sophie found herself back at her island, the Patagonian quartzite cool under her palms. This kitchen had become more than a workspace or showpiece. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of boundaries, a beautiful thing that survived attempted destruction and emerged stronger. Her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, old fears flared. Then she read it. "Ms. Bennett, you don't know me, but your story saved my life. My sister-in-law has been living in my house for 3 years, stealing from me, convinced she deserves what I've worked for. After seeing your courage, I've hired a lawyer. I'm taking my life back. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Sophie screenshot the message and added it to a folder labeled "Why We Fight." It contained hundreds of similar messages, each a reminder that our personal battles can light the way for others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Natalie's parole hearing loomed. Richard continued filing appeals from federal prison. Extended family members occasionally surfaced with their own entitled demands or accusations. But tonight in her kitchen, surrounded by survivors and thrivers, Sophie felt only gratitude. They'd tried to destroy her and created a warrior instead. They'd tried to steal her success and multiplied it 1,000-fold through the women now empowered to fight their own battles. The parole hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Sophie dressed carefully, professional, but not ostentatious, strong, but not vindictive. Marcus drove her to the correctional facility, where James waited with a folder of documentation they hoped they wouldn't need. "Remember," James advised, "stick to facts. Her behavior in prison, the continued threats, the lack of genuine remorse. Don't let her bait you into emotion." The hearing room was smaller than Sophie had expected. Natalie sat at a table in prison orange, her hair grayer, face thinner, but her eyes still held that familiar entitlement barely masked by practiced contrition. She spoke first, a rehearsed speech about finding faith, understanding her wrongs, wanting to rebuild her life and relationships with her children. She cried at appropriate moments, quoted scripture about forgiveness, promised she'd learned her lesson. Then it was Sophie's turn. "5 years ago, Natalie Patterson destroyed my kitchen while her stepfather assaulted me. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here because of what happened after the threats from prison, the attempted conspiracy to harm me, the complete lack of accountability." Sophie produced the letters, the evidence of Natalie's continued schemes, the warden's reports of her violent behavior toward other inmates. She claims transformation, but her actions show escalation. She's not sorry she committed these crimes. She's sorry she got caught. Releasing her early would send a dangerous message to every victim of family violence that performance matters more than genuine change. The parole board asked Natalie directly, "Do you accept full responsibility for your actions?" She hesitated just a moment too long. "I accept that my actions hurt my sister, but she needs to understand I was desperate. My business was failing, my family was struggling. She had so much, and family should share." The board member cut her off. "That's a no then." He looked at his colleagues who nodded in agreement. Parole denied. 5 more years before you can apply again. As they left, Natalie called out, "Sophie, please." Sophie turned Marcus tensing beside her. Natalie's mask had dropped completely. "You destroyed everything. My life, my family, my future for what? A kitchen?" "No," Sophie said quietly. "You destroyed everything. I just refuse to let you destroy me too." The drive back was quiet. In 5 years, they'd do this again and again after that if necessary. But each time would be easier, because each time she'd have less power, and Sophie would have more life built beyond her reach. Years continued to pass. The foundation became Sophie's life's work, guiding women through the process of reclaiming their power from family members who saw them as resources to be exploited, rather than people to be respected. The small brick building that housed their headquarters had once been a demolition company's office, a symbolic choice that Sophie appreciated. "We literally built hope where destruction once reigned," she often told visitors. "That's what we all do, take the rubble of our past and build something beautiful and lasting." At the 10-year mark, Sophie received an unexpected phone call from Arizona. Lily, now 20, was applying to design school. "I was wondering if you might write a recommendation," she asked hesitantly. "You're the reason I want to become a designer. I want to create spaces that make people feel safe and valued." "Of course," Sophie said, emotion thick in her throat. "I'd be honored." On the day Sophie celebrated her 50th birthday, surrounded by friends and colleagues in her kitchen, still beautiful, still symbolic, she received news that Richard had died in prison. She felt nothing, not joy, not sadness, not even relief. He had become irrelevant to her story, a footnote rather than a defining chapter. Natalie remained in prison, her repeated parole applications denied due to her continued refusal to take full responsibility. The last Sophie heard, she was still blaming everyone but herself. Eleanor had found purpose in her advocacy work, speaking to women's groups about recognizing and escaping enabling patterns. Their relationship had healed gradually, not to what it might have been without Richard's interference, but to something honest and sustainable. That evening, after her guests had gone, Sophie stood in her kitchen running her fingers along the quartzite countertops that had replaced the ones Richard had smashed a decade earlier. She thought about the thousands of women who had found courage through her story, the legislation that now protected them, the culture that was slowly changing to recognize family financial abuse as the crime it was. From the shelf above her refrigerator, she took down a small chunk of the original Kokota gold quartz, a piece she'd salvaged from the dumpster that day. She kept it not as a reminder of trauma, but as evidence of transformation. Tragedy into triumph, destruction into creation, pain into purpose. Her phone chimed with a new message, another woman seeking help, another kitchen somewhere being threatened, another boundary being crossed. Sophie smiled and began typing a response. They had tried to demolish her kitchen, but they'd built her legacy instead.